The following story is a little bit different than our typical romance scam victim stories. This is a story of how a lady turned the tables and frustrated the romance scammer. This is how I let on a romance scammer. Let me say that I hate what they do to people. So many are unable to identify them right away. I'm not one of those people. I can smell them from a mile away with their fake profiles and hello, dears. So I did this for all of those who have been duped by them. I'm in a lot of FB groups, anything from TV show fan pages to fitness and cooking groups. I work from home remotely and I spend a lot of time around my home doing what makes me happy. When I'm not logged into work, of course. So, when I met a guy who told me his name was Johnson, I knew I had to have a little fun. As a disclaimer, I don't recommend playing with scammers. If you don't know what you're doing, it can land you into a world of trouble and headaches. The group I met him in was a public one. It's a Southern and Grandma Recipes group. The group has thousands of members and anyone can join. I wrote a reply to the admin's post about making country gravy and biscuits. I said my grandmother made those or something like that. Johnson instantly replied to me. I felt like he'd been watching me and waiting. I can't be sure, but it certainly felt like that. He told me that my comment was smart and interesting. And I'm not sure how a comment about making gravy and biscuits would be smart and interesting, but I went with it. I told him thank you. I've been a gravy scholar for years. He then replied again, asking if he could message me as my profile photo showed my beauty. My profile photo is of a flower basket that sits on my porch. I told him sure, and by this time I'd already visited his profile. He had two photos of himself. Both were posted recently, and the profile was fairly new. His About section said he was a widow, big surprise there, and that he was from Rome, Italy, but lived in Los Angeles, and he was an orthopedic surgeon. It checked all the boxes in the world of romance scammer profiles. I checked his photos and didn't get any information on them, but I know I've seen them on other fake profiles. They're passed around quite often. Johnson told me that he was so alone since his wife died and that he didn't know what he would do as he's raising his 9-year-old daughter, who, for whatever reason, her name was Jenny. But remember this name, as it changes later during our online relationship. He said Jenny was away at boarding school and he was in Yemen doing foot surgeries because apparently there are some serious foot issues there, as every fake I talked to seems to be working on feet in Yemen. He told me he was on contract for 8 months, then would return to his house in Los Angeles. I've included a photo of his home that he sent me in this email, so you can see it's clearly not a home located in Los Angeles for obvious reasons. He said once his contract was over, he would retire for good as he hates being sent to other countries to operate on people's bones, bones, bones. I advised him that he should go ahead and open his own foot clinic in a local shopping mall, as Los Angeles has plenty of malls, and he can buy some space in there and open his own foot clinic. He told me I was such a smart businesswoman for suggesting that, and went into asking me what I do for a living. I decided not to go too wild on my response as I wanted him to think that I was genuine in my conversations. Most times I tell these guys I'm something unbelievable, and they block me. I told him that I manage outlet malls, and that's how I knew so much about being able to find him space for his foot clinic when he returns home from Yemen. This piqued his interest, and he said he knew there was something special about me. Yeah, money. We did some small talk, and he asked my favorite foods and colors, favorite song, and of course he told me he loves romance songs, songs about love and being forever. He loves romantic dinners. I asked him, what are romantic dinners? He said fine dining with a loved one. So strange. The time came for him to ask for my email address and phone number. I was prepared as I have a throwaway email address that I use just for chats with these guys. I gave him my email but told him, I'm not giving you my phone number until we get to know each other better. Surprisingly, though, he said he understood, and he said that he had to go, but he would email me soon and to please respond to his email. I told him I would, and he ended the chat with a bunch of heart emojis. I didn't accept his friend request, though. I never add them as friends on my social media. He did email, and his email was copy and pasted with the same old story. Widow and his daughter, Elizabeth. I guess her other name wasn't good enough, so he changed it and hoped I wouldn't notice. But she was his whole world after his wife died in a tragic car accident. He blabbed on about his life as a child, being the only child of his parents, and they died too, and he was left alone. He never clearly told me how he got from Rome to Los Angeles and became a doctor. He went over again his favorite food and music, giving me 2 links to love songs. One was from the band Lifehouse, and the other was a Don Williams song. He then asked me my favorite songs and food, same thing he asked me in chat. He asked if I date men online and my experience. This was a typical scammer format of questions. He then sent a photo of his so-called daughter with 2 names and more photos of him, which I've seen before on scammer profiles. I decided to reply, telling him that I was single after my husband ran off with my sister, and how I don't have any children, but I own 3 dogs all named Chuggy. It makes it easier when I call them to dinner as they all have the same name. I live in a beautiful plantation-style home in southern Louisiana, and I live in Dallas, by the way, and that I often sit on my porch staring into the swamp, wishing for a man to come out of the woods and bring me roses, but all I have are my shopping mall management job. Really, if you read my reply, you would halfway think I was either serious or insane, and he fortunately found me to be serious. I closed my email to him with wishfully dreaming of love and sent him a stock photo of a woman staring out a window. He replied telling me my photo was beautiful. Great, I thought. He then asked me for my phone number or if I could download the old What's an app, as Betty would say, and we can better communicate because suddenly he's unable to email very often due to restrictions in the hospital where he stays. His office and sleeping quarters, as he said, are in the hospital. I told him that was great as he saves on commuting to and from the foot clinic. I told him I would have to consider downloading the talking app and I would let him know. He replied quickly, giving me his phone number, which was a Los Angeles area code. I imagine it was a free voicemail number. He then told me more about his little daughter Elizabeth and how she is so lonely in the boarding school and cries to have a mother. He asked me if I would email little Elizabeth and check on her because, due to his work restrictions, he's unable to email her often. Amazingly, his work somehow allows him to email strange women he meets online, but his work won't allow him to email his own daughter. Kind of funny how that happens, huh? He gave me a Yahoo address to little Elizabeth and asked me to email her to introduce myself to her as his daddy's new friend and tell her that I want to know how school is going. I told him I would, of course, email little Jenny Elizabeth while she's away at an undisclosed boarding school. He never said which boarding school, the one in the UK or the very famous one in Nebraska. Either way, poor little Elizabeth, the motherless child, was lonely. I did email her. I introduced myself as his daddy's new squeeze and told her that I was told she cries a lot. I told her that's not cool, and she'll never sit at the cool kids table during lunch if she keeps crying like an emotionally unstable nerd. Within a few hours, I received a reply from this wonderful Elizabeth. She told me her name is Elizabeth, and she is in an international boarding school that her mother had died, and she wanted to know if I love her daddy and will I be her new mother, and if I had any children she could play jump rope with. She also said the kids in school are mean and she has no friends. I, of course, replied to her, being the caring woman I am, telling her that she really needs to pull herself together and stop crying for starters. There is no crying in boarding school, especially an international one. I told her it's so difficult to meet new friends when all you do is cry. It makes the kids uncomfortable. I told her I'm considering going steady with her father, but we don't know each other yet as he's still busy fixing toenails in Yemen. War is hell. I told her I could be a mother to her, but if so, she needs to go to a public school and learn to toughen up. Johnson then emailed me. It's as if they were both the same person. He asked if I heard from little Elizabeth, and I told him yes. I also told him that I told her I would adopt her and be her new mother, but we need to take her out of boarding school. That's money wasted. And it's clear to me, judging by her emails, that it would be wasted money to try and educate her as she's clearly not very bright. I suggested we enroll her in Claremont High School. That was the school in the movie Dangerous Minds, by the way. Johnson agreed, and when he returned home, he would send for little Elizabeth, and we'll get her into this school that I suggested. Johnson pushed in his email for me to give him my phone number to chat on the app. I told him I was going to the mall today for work and I would look into getting a new phone, and when I do, I'll download the What's app. I told him I had to go to work, as work was calling, and I was closing a multi-million-dollar deal for a new cinnamon bun shack kiosk that will make millions for the mall. Who doesn't love cinnamon buns? We agreed to talk later, and I let him know, and I would add him on the What's app when I got my phone downloaded with the What's app. I told him I will, absolutely, don't worry. I decided to get a second phone. I thought if I'm going to carry on, he'll want to talk to me on this app. I bought one of those prepaid phones from a dollar discount store. The phone was around $20, and it was a cheap smartphone, and the plan was $19 a month with a preloaded card. I got the phone going and decided to go and pick a Louisiana phone number. In fact, I made it a point to have an area code in southern Louisiana. I set up the voicemail and downloaded the What's app. Sure enough, I was able to load his number and his profile on What's app, and it was a photo of him with the name Dr. Johnson, which I found hilarious. I messaged him, "Hello, Johnson, it's your future wife." His response was, "Who is this?" I told him my name, and he was so glad I was here. No more emails, and now he had my phone number, or so he thought. I tried to call him, but he wouldn't answer. He then texted telling me that due to the current security conditions, he was unable to answer, but we could text and he'd call me later. He asked how my day was and the typical generic stuff that they all ask. He told me the hospital was under attack by rebels, and I told him, I understand. Sometimes the mall I manage has rebel teenagers who run up and down the escalators. We call mall security, but they always slip through and out of sight and run into the parking lot before Big Eddie can catch them. He's our mall officer. We're saving to buy him a Segway. Johnson said he was so upset because he was locked in his sleeping quarters due to the security risk and was scared. He said he was so tired of this in his contract, but he can't break it because he would lose his $1 million retirement payout. I told him not to quit, Mama didn't raise quitters, and to let my love carry him through this security crisis. Johnson told me I was the best woman ever, so loving and caring, and that I understood his needs, and I was his soulmate and his heartbeat. Of course I was, I told him. He then asked me if I've talked to little Elizabeth. I told him no, but I'd not checked my email either. He told me that the headmaster emailed him. Suddenly he can email others even though there's a security crisis going on. Funny how that works, huh? And that Elizabeth's grades were poor and that the school is charging him $1,000 fine due to her grades being so poor. Wow, what pressure for a kid. Maintain your grades or face a fine. I told him that's terrible and his daughter should clean the school to pay off her fine for poor grades. He told me, yeah, He tried to pay the fine, but his bank account was frozen due to a fraudulent charge on his account, and he thinks a woman he chatted to online last year who supposedly scammed him somehow used his account. I hate when that happens. I told him to call his bank and fix it, but he said that his bank requires him to sign a legal document in person when he returns to the state. I told him to let the school know of his predicament and they can have him pay for the fine later. He said he was very confused and unsure what was happening. Being the kind soul I am, I explained to him that because his daughter is dumb in school, he has to pay a fine, and he should call the school and tell them he will pay them when he returns from his toenail contract. This went totally over his head, and he thanked me for the suggestions. I think he felt I wouldn't pay it, so he dropped the subject and told me he would fix things himself. He quickly shifted to asking me if I've taken my food, another popular question for these guys to ask. I told him yes, that I had eaten an entire Costco rotisserie chicken and a whole cheesecake because I was watching my weight. He told me the food at the hospital was terrible, and I told him hospital food often is. He said he would just sleep and go hungry instead. I told him to eat some saltine crackers from the hospital kitchen. They're free. And he bid me a good night. He didn't message me till later that next night, asking how my day was and that he couldn't stop thinking about me. Obsessed much, buddy? I told him I was busy and out running errands and call me later. I was actually going out and left my extra phone at home. It was a few hours before I returned home and I had 11 missed calls. This guy was persistent. The missed call icon was followed by him asking where I was and what I was doing. I finally sat down to respond. I told him I was out running errands. He then went into this spiral of telling me we must stay in touch at all times no matter what, and he was scared something had happened to me. I told him not to worry. I'm not a bad driver like his wife was. That went over his head, too. He then rang me. I decided to put on my best southern Louisiana accent and answered the phone. His voice was very deep, and he definitely wasn't from Rome. He told me he was thinking of me and he was sorry he couldn't call sooner as the reception was very poor. I forgave him and asked him how his work was going, and he told me he was so busy doing paperworks. I imagine toenail surgery doesn't require a lot of paperworks. He told me he spoke to Elizabeth and she told him that she couldn't wait to meet me and that we're going to be such a great family. I told him that he should make sure he brings little Elizabeth with him when he decides to visit my plantation home in Louisiana. He said he wanted to finish his contract and then he would come and visit. He was going to sell his home in Los Angeles and buy a big house in my town. Lucky me. I asked him if he thought more about buying a foot repair kiosk in the mall by my house, and he said once he gets his $1 million retirement payout, he will do just that. I was elated and acted very excited for him. I told him there's a perfect kiosk for sale right next to the Jamba Juice in the mall, and it was for sale for $999,999. It would leave him plenty of money from his big retirement check. He told me that sounded great, and he can't wait to meet me as I'm the love of his life. He said he was going to buy me an engagement ring and then proceeded to sing me some love song. I can't even recall what it was now, but it was something cheesy. They all sing and say the same songs. He asked me if I was going to sleep, and I told him yes, it's late, and the swamp gators are already sleeping in the yard. He did the kissy phone thing and hung up. He did text me around 3 a.m. my time asking what I was doing, and he tried to call several times, but again, I turn that phone off and I go to bed when I'm done talking. Typical romance scammer trying to keep me awake all night. I messaged him the next morning and told him I needed my beauty sleep. Johnson said he didn't mean to call, but he had an emergency, that his phone had run low on minutes due to us talking, and he asked if I was going to work today. I told him yes, I had an important deal to close by the hot dog stand. He asked me to pick up a $100 Apple Card as he can't access one from the hospital, which apparently is still on lockdown and his phone's nearly out of minutes. I told him I would be very busy, but I'll see what I could do. He told me he loves me so much he can't stop thinking about my sexy body and face, and our love is so strong. I told him every time I look at a toenail, I think of him. I went about my day, leaving the phone at home, of course, and I decided around 7 p.m. that night to turn it on, and oh boy, over 40 missed phone calls and several texts. His last text was him telling me that I had betrayed him and he was so hurt. I messaged him telling him I'm at work. That's where I was. I also had an email from poor little Elizabeth telling me she was worried as her daddy had not heard from me. The moment I read his messages, my phone rang. He could see I was on the app and I had read his messages. Johnson called asking what was going on, where was I, why didn't I answer him? I told him that I was closing hundreds of dollars in deals at the mall and my phone is forbidden to be on during business meetings due to the mall possibly listening to our competitor, the Mall of the Swamp. He asked if I got his card and to scratch the back and take a picture. I then started fake crying. I told him that I got the card and then my shoe got caught in the escalator and the card slipped out of my business blouse pocket. When I bent down to save my shoe, the card got caught on the sharp escalator steps and it kept flapping against each step, clawing the card. I finally had a hard decision to make and I saved my shoe first and then got the card, but I think it was damaged. He told me to give him the numbers off the card, and I told him there are no numbers. The escalator tore it apart. I don't know what to do. Then I started to pretend cry harder. He told me to calm down, drive back to the store, and get a different card. I told him I would, and I was so sorry. Damn that escalator. Damn it to hell. He told me to stay on the phone with him while I drove to the store to return the card, so I did just that. I put on some music in the background and started singing, telling him I was driving. I used some sound effects of horns honking and I started yelling at the other imaginary drivers. He told me to calm down and drive safely, and I again told him that I'm not his wife. Stop comparing me to her. I know how to drive unlike her. I played a sound effect of a car tire screeching and then I told him I'd arrived. I pretended to walk into the mall and told him I was at the Apple Card store and hold on, I had to put him in my purse so I could focus on the cashier. I held the phone like it was muffled when I was supposed to be speaking to the cashier and then speak when it was my turn so he could hear me clearly but no one else. I then started screaming, "What do you mean no returns or refunds? I need a card. My foot doctor husband needs it. I want a manager." He kept saying calm down, and I could hear him saying it over and over, calm down, calm down. I kept screaming, I want a manager, damn that escalator. I then pretended to leave the mall, telling him, of course while pretend crying, that the manager refused to refund the card and I need to talk to the escalator company to see if I can file a claim for the card, and it would take 14 to 16 weeks, and by that time he'd be here with me and we can get our refund. He asked if I got another card then and just buy a second one until we get our refund. I told him no. I was on my way home now and it's raining. I put on music like it was my car stereo and played a sound effect of tires and horns. I told him it was dark now and I can't see at night. He told me to message me when I got home. No card for Johnson. I waited for a good hour and then told him I was home and soaking wet from the rain and it ruined my hair. He said he was sorry about that and again asked about a card. I told him no, we have to wait for the rebate. He told me not to worry about it tonight and I can go get another card later. He then called me again asking what I was doing, and he told me he was thinking of me and asked if I would be sleeping soon. I told him yes, as I have work tomorrow, and he told me he was lonely and thinking of me and he couldn't wait to hold me in his arms. And he kept repeating, his arms, his arms, his arms. I told him I felt extremely gassy and needed to go to bed and release this gas into my blanket. He told me he loves me and he reminded me that we must keep in touch at all hours, and said goodnight. I turned that phone off, and sure enough, the next day, tons of missed calls from the middle of the night, and a text at 2 a.m. saying, "Good morning, honey. Did you sleep well?" Sleep well? We hung up at 11 p.m. Yes, those few hours were refreshing. I can see how victims become worn down with this nonsense of all night calling and texting. I told him I had no time. I was late for a meeting, and he reminded me again to get a card. And he then told me that the headmaster at Elizabeth's school contacted him to tell him that Elizabeth had suddenly fallen ill and she was rushed to the hospital for an infection, and they needed to treat her with antibiotic medicine, but the medicine was $400. I told him they should use GoodRx discount card to save money, and he said, "Yes, dear. Can you help by sending $400 to the headmaster of the school to pay for the medicine?" "No," I told him, "but our daughter's very ill." I asked him why he couldn't do it, and then he called. He said that his bank account is still frozen, and he started to fake cry, saying his daughter needs the money. She needs her medicine. I told him I would send it, and I asked him, "How do I get it to this headmaster?" He was elated, and he would text me the information to do it swiftly. Go fast," he said. He hung up with me and texted me the name of a lady who lived in the UK. Leslie was her first name. He told me to wire it through the bank and show him the transfer. I could do it online right now, he said. I told him no, I'd have to go to the bank and transfer funds first, but I'll work on it. He told me how much he loved me and couldn't wait to make me his wife. Yay, go me. I decided to go ahead and ask a friend of mine online to make a bank transfer slip. I figured I was this far into things, why not see this through? He made the slip for me and I gave it to Johnson. He thanked me and told me I was his only heartbeat, his soulmate and reason for living. Wow, how special. I went about my business, and later that night Johnson called me telling me that I must call my bank because the headmaster said the money did not go through. I told him it did, and the slip was there as proof, and accused the headmaster of keeping the money for herself. I told him I would call the school and get her fired. He told me, "Calm down," and he kept saying, "Calm down, dear, calm down." I told him, "No, this woman has little Elizabeth's medication money." He told me he'd straighten it out. I asked him about little Elizabeth, and he said not to worry and just send another transfer until it gets straightened out, 'cause of course I have unlimited money to send. I told him, okay, I'll do it right away, but I won't send it to that nasty headmaster again. She's a thief. He gave me the name of a woman in Connecticut to wire the money to. My friend made a second slip, and I sent it within half an hour and told him, "Hurry, get the money and let's save sick little Elizabeth." Well, of course, about an hour later, he came back saying the money wasn't there. I started yelling into the phone, telling him how this woman in Connecticut has spent the money. This is terrible. He urged me to call my bank, so I pretended I did and told him the bank said it went through. I told him I was calling the police and reporting this, and he told me no. He said instead, go ahead and get a $500 iTunes card and give him the numbers. He could pay for Elizabeth's medicine with an iTunes card. Wow, what kind of pharmacy accepts iTunes cards for medicine? I told him absolutely not, because we're still waiting for my refund from the escalator damaged card, and I've already done 2 bank transfers. I have no more money. He became upset, telling me if I loved him, I would find a way, and he asked me if I have a car or some family heirlooms I can sell. I told him, of course. My Aunt Bertie's collection of McDonald's cups from the 1980s are worth a mint. He told me to sell them quick, and take the money and get the iTunes card. Well, by this time, I'm kind of tired of this game. However, I'm no quitter. I sent him a photo of the collectible cups I would be selling, which I've also included in this email for you to use. I told him I would have to go to the collectible cup store in town, and it would have to wait until tomorrow, as it's already 10 p.m. and they're closed. Johnson told me to go do it first thing in the morning and hurry. He then sent me a couple of links to some romantic songs and told me I was again his heartbeat and a loving, caring woman, that he was going to suddenly take a vacation to come and see me. I told him I was tired and I went to bed. I then shut off that phone until the next evening. Of course, I had tons of missed calls, and I also had an email from little Elizabeth telling me she was gravely ill and wanted to know why I had forsaken her. In fact, the email said, "Mummy, why have you forsaken me to fall so ill? I need the iTunes card so I can get my medicine." Amazingly enough, she was gravely ill but had enough strength to email me. Wow, what a champion. I responded to little Elizabeth's email telling her that her headmaster had used all the money for her medication on a new pair of shoes, and then this random woman in Connecticut had also spent the money, and then I went to get the iTunes cards and there was none as the store was out, so she just needs to hold on until her daddy can get home and fix his bank account. I got no response from her, but funny enough, Johnson called me 10 minutes later after I sent the email to Elizabeth, and he asked where the cards are and why I didn't respond to all his texts and calls. I again told him I had to work and that I went to the store, but the store had no iTunes, so instead, I bought $500 worth of gift cards to TCBY Frozen Yogurt Shop and asked him if that would be okay. He started yelling at me that I was a silly woman and I need to listen to his instructions and that he cannot pay for medicine with a yogurt card, only iTunes or Apple gift cards, and I need to return them right away and get the correct cards and follow his instructions. I told him I can't, as I thought about it and instead bought the yogurt gift cards and on the way home became so hungry that I bought myself the mega yogurt cup and used all the gift cards for myself because I got sprinkles on my yogurt. His response to me was, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, this so bad." He then instructed me to transfer money instead to the headmaster as the headmaster said she didn't get the first transfer. I told him I don't believe her. I think we need to move little Elizabeth out of that school. Besides, she's not very smart anyway. He agreed but said he needs the medicine first. She's far too ill to travel. I told him I was tired of being this kid's mother and maybe we should just leave her in the boarding school and let them deal with her. He said it was a good idea, but she needs her medicine. I told Johnson, then come home and fix your bank account. He told me no, he was unable as he would lose his mega million retirement money. I told him we all have to make sacrifices in life. Just come home and help your kid. His response was, "Oh, but you need to help me." I told him my bank of charity was closed and I don't think I want to be with you anymore. He pretended he couldn't hear me and kept saying, "Hello, hello, dear, hello, do you hear me? Are you there, dear?" I told him he could stop pretending that he can't hear me. "I'm not sending gift cards or money transfers. I think we need to see other people," I told him. "I met a nice doctor who just came home from Yemen and he's going to take me on a cruise around the world. Perhaps you know him." Johnson became livid, calling me a scammer and a liar and that I never loved him and that I was wasting his time. Before I was able to respond, he hung up, so I blocked him. I never heard from him or the so-called daughter. I did waste a lot of his time, and it was time spent he could have been talking to someone who might have believed his BS. Honestly, it felt good to frustrate him. I wanted to share this as there were so many red flags in his stories, so many that were so easy to spot, and I wish more people would stop and see them before sending money. I received several phone calls from my extra phone number, and in the end, I stopped refilling my minutes on that phone. I also had to block some people on my social media, including a young man from Lagos, Nigeria, who sent me a friend request and then a message saying he knew me and wanted to talk. I figured that was likely my scammer or maybe his friend. Prior to this, I'd never gotten any friend requests from someone in that country. Please be careful and please look for the red flags. It's so easy to fall into their traps if you don't know what to look for. Their stories are ridiculous, and if you listen long enough, you'll spot them. Thank you to everyone for allowing me to share. Sincerely, Catherine from Texas, not Louisiana. And we'd like to thank this lady for sharing her story. It was a very funny story and very unusual for people to carry on with a scammer like that. We always tell people to be careful when you're talking with scammers, especially if you know they're a fake. It's always best to block. If you'd like to share your story, whether you lost money or not, or you just carried on with a romance scammer, we'd love to hear it. You can email us, scammingscammers@gmail.com, or you can find our inbox on FB Scamming Cyber Education. Our inbox can be found there. You could drop us a message or an email, include any screenshots and as much information as possible so we can verify your story and narrate it into a video. Until next time, stay safe, and as always, look for the red flags, and if it feels wrong, block them.